Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today, I am bringing you my guest.
Heshan.
He is the creator behind The Model Man. Now, let me ask you, how is your relationship with your family? Do you regularly have deep and meaningful conversations with your parents? Could you imagine working with your dad day in and day out? That is why Heshan is here today to share his story and his service. He turned his family relationship around from having resentment with each other to now with acceptance. And yes, he is working with his dad, and they are both continuing to learn more about each other, to learn more stories and layers so they can continue to have a great relationship. I personally have a very close relationship with my family, and it really breaks my heart when other people tell me how much pain they're going through when they talk about their families. Thankfully for Hish and his dad, for having such an amazing service, especially for men out there to open up the emotional side of them.
Heshan
and I talked more about family relationships on this episode. We talked about mental health, we talked about the self journey, we talked about how important it is to take on self responsibility.
Heshan
And I honestly could have gone on and on. That's why this interview is going to be in two parts. Now, we would really love it if you can screenshot this episode, however you're watching it, and tag us on social. Share the love. I'm so excited for you to listen to his story. So enjoy the interview.
Hello, Heshan. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sparing your time for me to come and chat with me and share your story with people. But before you share your story and share what the Model Man is, I would love to know, how are you feeling today?
How am I feeling? Usually before I check into that, I take a deep breath. So I'm feeling pretty calm, actually, and pretty rested. I was just mentioning to you before, I had a call with my good friend Dane, and who's been on this podcast before. And one thing I love to do to get into a state that puts me in prime position to be on a call or to be on a talk is talk with somebody that you really trust and is a good friend, and just have a talk about life. And that's what we did. We just caught up, we checked in, and that actually really cleared the space for me to be able on this call to be super present. And it kind of cleared the space for me to feel like I'd left everything outside of the call, so that when I show up here, I'm just with you.
Oh, I would like to ask, how often do you do that with your trust group?
Whenever I feel called to it, honestly. So there's not a this many times per week that I'll call people and talk to them. But if I feel led to just call someone and I feel that in my gut and in my heart, I'll call them. And I called Dane for that reason, not because I wanted to say anything in particular. I just felt like, hey, I want to talk to him, and I'm not sure why, but I just feel led to call him right now. And that's what I did. Right before the call. Yeah.
Yes, more people should do that, to be honest, because they never know what the conversation may bring.
Yeah, well, a big part of mental health, which is something I think you wanted to talk about today, is I think you're able to connect to other people. Your mental health just increases naturally, right? If we simplify it, so
Yes.
just connection always brings that level of peace that
Yes.
like a lot of us are searching for.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah.
Before we dive too deep onto that though, I would love to know, what were you doing? Actually, share with everyone. What were you doing before the Model Man?
What was I doing before the Model Man? Well, there's been quite a bit of a journey towards that. Like I'm an engineer by trade, so I studied engineering, and then after uni, I actually went and lived in China for a while. So I was working in Beijing for a 3D printing company down there, and that experience really opened my eyes up to the world. And I actually had a boss who said that he really believed in me and thought I could go and start my own businesses and things like that. And that conversation on like one of the last few days while I was living in China that year sparked me starting up my own businesses. One was a 3D printing company, and then another one was a Bluetooth products importing business. And both of them I started with two of my friends back in Australia when I came back. Went on a bit of a journey with those things and ended up selling out of those businesses because I felt like something bigger was calling me.
Yeah.
And about 6 years down the track, it was the Model Man. So I really did go on this journey of self-discovery through building out those organizations, traveling back and forth between here and China, learning a lot about myself, through those experiences. And at the same time, going through a lot of spiritual development as well. I was in Bhutan. I had quite a vast array of experiences, especially in my mid 20s. And then in the last few years, it's been really drilling down on what is my life purpose? Why am I here? What am I here to give back to the world? Like, I feel like every human being has something to give back. And that's why we're all alive, to see how we can contractually serve one another, so that we can live in a world that works for everyone. I really do believe that's the reason we're here. So I spent the last few years trying to discover that, and that manifested into the Model Man. So that's kind of been my journey in short. There's obviously been a lot of things that have happened in between to get me to this point, but that would be the journey in short.
Yeah, thank you for cutting it short. Because everyone has stories and layers, and but before you started Model Man, what made you dig deep to go on a self journey?
Two things. One, my journey with my father, I would say, was a pivotal one, and just general family life, and how that shaped me as a young man and then into an adult as well. And then the second thing would be an event that I actually mentioned on the podcast you were listening to the other day, which is when I was 22 years old, I actually ended up getting hit with a glass bottle in a club while I was trying to break up a fight. And that event really was like an immediate shift. It was like a rock bottom moment in my life where I was left with, either I do something about my life or I'm not going to have a life to look forward to. And I learned in that moment while I was lying in the hospital bed before I was getting surgery on my eyelid, that I was the one who had created everything that was happening in my life. Like, everything was my fault. Now, that doesn't mean I was blaming myself for what happened, but I recognized that my life was my responsibility in that moment. And that's what caused a shift towards a new pathway in life. All the old things kind of moved out from that point and new things started to shift in. And this was over the next 6 to 8 years. So it wasn't a short process, but I do remember distinctly my life before and after that event. And then also my journey with my father as well. And I can dive deeper into that if you want, but those two things.
Yeah. And that is what the Model Man is about, right?
Yeah. So the Model Man, in short, is about helping men in places of work overcome stress, so reduce their capacity for stress or eliminate it completely, and improve performance. But the underlying subtext of all of that is to help men kind of develop a deeper sense of self in their work environments and still be able to be their true selves no matter what's thrown at them in life. And that came out of my journey with me and my dad, because me and my dad didn't have the best relationship growing up. He was a corporate man most of his life. He still is today. And he would come home very stressed, not really being fully present with his family because of what was going on in his work days and what was happening in his work environments and the pressure to perform ultimately. And I really do believe in society, men have been bred for a long time to have to perform, bring home the bacon, this whole concept of pushing to do more and more and more in order to provide for your family and protect them. But the irony in that is the place that they're going to go and earn that money to provide for their family is the very place that's causing the stress that they bring home, that they take out on their family. So it's a vicious cycle, right? And that was a cycle and the story of my life growing up, because I was spending most of my time breaking up the fight between my mom and my dad and making sure that they kind of kept the peace. And this developed in me an incessant need to problem solve and make sure that there was peace in relationships. And that's why I do what I do now, because me and my dad have worked on our relationship since, and now me and him are working together on this to give back into the environments that took away a lot from us. Yeah. But we also know that if they're environments that are conducive for people to be themselves, this world will be a better place, because the place where men and women spend most of their time in a 24-hour workday and 24-hour day is the workplace, right? Great. So if that environment is unsafe, then you're spending most of your life feeling unsafe and feeling like you're unable to be yourself. And that becomes a container for us to then develop who we are and then take that out into society and be very destructive, which is what happened to my dad.
Yeah.
Now, I used to blame him for that, right? But I recognized as I grew older, it wasn't his fault. He was within a system that conditioned him to be a certain way, and he didn't have the awareness of how to compose himself while being in those environments, how to deal with the pressure, how to deal with the stress that was accumulated over time. And the result was simply outbursts. Because when you fill a balloon up with air, eventually it'll burst if you don't release some of the air.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens with stress. If you don't have healthy mediums to release stress and pressure that accumulates in places like work, then eventually you burst. And the people that are usually at the end of that bursting is your family or your loved ones. Those are the ones who see it the most, because usually men feel safest to open up around their families or to open up around their loved ones, because they feel like they'll be accepted even in their anger, even in their stress around those people, where those people won't leave them. That's why it usually ends up being that way. And I know that's the story of many men, because I've worked with many men one-on-one, and this is the story that they tell me. In some capacity, they relate to it.
Yeah. Well, can you please share with people how you and your dad helped them?
Well, right now, my dad's acting as my mentor, and he's helping me create what we're trying to create, which is two things. We're helping men with their mindset, and we're helping organizations in terms of developing positive culture. The culture piece is a second piece. Right now, we're really focusing on the mindset of men. And how me and him have developed this out is we look at organizations like an organism, like a living body, right? And every body has trillions of cells. Now, organizations have trillions of cells who are their workers. And if any cell is unhealthy, then the whole organization or organism suffers. So it's really this focus on what's going to make each individual cell healthy so that the organization can operate as a whole, collective, healthy, holistic organism.
Yeah.
And how can we produce environments in these organizations that allow for that health to be maintained? So healthy, positive culture will lead to healthy, positive workers. And healthy, positive workers leads to positive results for the company. That's how me and Dad have kind of taken the angle of approaching organizations and helping them with helping men, and specifically male leaders right now is who we're working with. So leaders of teams, like team leaders, or eventually we'd love to work with CEOs as well. But right now we're working with a lot of team leaders on how to improve their performance by overcoming all the things that cause them stress in the workplace. That's how me and Dad are helping people at the moment.
Thank you so much for this service. And for those who are listening and watching, if you are a manager or a leader, or maybe just a normal worker, whatever, it is never too late or too early to start on changing your mindset. And if the current lifestyle is really not serving you, and if you have noticed that you have a lot of anger and resentment towards your work and the people around you, then here is something that you can look into. And yeah, I think it's amazing. But I would also love to know, obviously, like you said, you and your dad's relationship wasn't always the best. So how did you actually open up that conversation with him?
That was tough. For a long time, probably from 18 to like 26, 27, I didn't really have much of a relationship with him. It was kind of like, hey, how you going? And then just going to my room. Like, how was your day? And just going to my room. And that relationship was the same actually with my mum. So I've developed out my relationship with both people. But the model man was really inside the relationship with Dad. And what changed was I actually did a personal development course that kind of opened my eyes to, if I had to label forgiveness with two things, it was I developed empathy for him, and I learned, let's just talk about the empathy bit. So I learned to put myself in his shoes and discover more of why he did what he did. And the more I questioned that, started to ask him about his life, I started to understand things about him that I realized I had just been assuming about him for a long time. So I think a key to forgiving him was actually be willing to go and learn about him and his perspective on the things that happened. and then sharing with him about how I felt about those situations as well, but not making him wrong or not blaming him. I think that was a key element in him being able to open up and talk to me in a way where we could actually heal the wounds that were there between him and I. And that's still an ongoing journey now, but empathy was the key part of me healing this with him. Like, that's what I would say.
I love it. I feel like it's a quality that is not really taught in the society, which is a shame.
Well, how do you teach empathy in school?
How do you teach empathy in school? I don't know. You start helping people, I guess, maybe.
As in, the point of that is it's a difficult thing to teach, right? It's more of a, it's not a thing you put in the curriculum and then just teach people. And that's where we grow up. We learn things through school and education, and then from our surroundings as well. But I think there does definitely need to be more of an emphasis on parents being able to teach their kids empathy, for example. And that's through practicing it and showing it as an example. The whole concept of the model man is leading by example. It's being able to listen, it's being able to learn from others and then lead through example. And I think empathy is best taught through showing empathy to others.
Yes. Thank you for saying that, because for those who are listening and watching, I just want to remind you that no matter who you are a role model to somebody. And if you want to practice being empathy today or being more compassionate, sure. And I am sure you are going to inspire somebody else. I also know that a lot of people probably have, tough conversations that they haven't opened up yet with their family. So what would be, let's say, 3 tips that you would like to give to everyone for them to turn their relationship around?
Well, it is really uncomfortable to approach these things. So the first thing that's needed is courage. Like, there has to be an element of courage in being able to take that first step and actually just message that person or call that person. If a tip around that would be to actually just send the message and say, hey, can we have a chat? I'd love to chat to you about something. Do you have any time? Just even putting something in existence or in place locks it into happening so that you can't pull yourself out. Because that initial first step is always the most difficult with anything in life. And that includes the parts of forgiveness. The second, 3 tips. The second tip would be make sure that when you're in the conversation, not to blame. And this is what I was getting at before. So don't make a person feel like they're wrong. Focus on making a person feel like you understand them. Like, make that the focus of the conversation. So don't come in, try to say like, I felt like this and it's because you did this. And like, I'm just really angry and hurt and blah, blah, blah. It's good to share emotions and from a place of love.
Yes.
But I think the crux of the conversation needs to be giving up your opinion and your point of view on the situation and just sharing from a place of actually asking questions as well. That would be the third tip on that one. So these kind of conversations, rather than trying to speak so much, like, ask questions to get to understand them more. That's the empathy piece. That's a third tip. So if you're asking curious questions, then that actually builds trust from the other person because they feel like you're making an attempt to understand them. And when people feel understood, they let their guard down, and that starts to then open them up to listening to you, right? And what you have to say about how you felt and how you got hurt. But start off with asking curious questions when it comes to these kind of things. And then also pre-frame the conversation by saying, hey, I've come to talk to you about this because I actually want to develop a better connection with you.
Yeah.
And frame it positively. Don't frame it in a way that's probably a 4th tip now. But yeah, just make sure the framing of the conversation is positive. Even if you're feeling really hurt, even if you're feeling really angry, just find that way to make sure that you keep a positive frame of mind when you come in, and then just ask curious questions to understand that person. And then when you feel like their guard is down and they feel understood, then you can share about how you felt about the situation too. And it'll usually come from a healthier place when you follow that order, rather than coming in just being like, I feel really pissed off, and just pretty much exploding onto a person.
Yes.
Which is what a lot of people do when they try to have these conversations. They don't actually try to understand the other person. They're too busy trying to get their point of view across.
Yes,
A lot of conversation doesn't work.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for being so brave for yourself and for your family to heal
Right.
your family. It's beautiful. And thank you for the tips. And I guess it's a little bit hard for people to not get defensive because, like you said, everyone is trying to get their opinions across. But by asking questions, you are A, trying to get to know each other, and B, you are not trying to form weird stories in your head. So
So,
I love it. Like, I just love the tips that you have given. Now, you said you are helping people at workforce. So how do you think males can be there for each other, for other males, and start talking more about emotions?
yeah, that's a good question. I think what came to me just then is being an example. I think we can't ever force other people, and it's men and women as both, right? But if we're talking about men specifically, the model man is about getting men to lead by example because then it provides people with an option as to whether they want to model that behavior or not, rather than trying to force somebody to be a certain way because you think that's the correct way.
Yeah.
Too many people are focused on right and wrong and
Mhm.
trying to prove that they're right and trying to prove the other person is wrong. And the
Mhm.
same thing comes to with helping other people. And I've honestly been, I've done this myself where I've wanted to help people, but I've caught myself like seeing that, oh, what they're doing is wrong and what I'm thinking is correct. And then trying to put that onto them and teach them what I know. Right. And that comes from ego.
Yes.
And a big part of these kind of things is being able to take responsibility for when you do that stuff. It's a superpower to take responsibility. I really want people to understand that because if you're able to take responsibility for everything that's occurring in your life, it gives you power, right? And in terms of handling emotions, that second piece that you're talking about, I think the ability to handle emotions comes from a capacity to be able to slow down,
Mm.
right? And what I mean by that is I help men go from stress-centered mindsets to what I call rest-centered mindsets. And more well-being and adopt a more well-being lifestyle approach to life. But what that means is when I say rest is actually when I say stress, I'm talking about the hustle fallacy, where people are taught to hustle and metaphorically whip themselves to produce results in these organizations. Do more, hit the deadline, blah, 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 right? But I'm trying to teach men, but that kind of thinking doesn't allow for people to be with their emotions in a healthy way because it makes you kind of go like this and your emotions will also be churning like this and you won't be able to manage them as easily than if you're actually slowing down to be with them.
Yeah.
Now rest culture and rest mindset is about slowing down, getting into a peaceful state, and that's what I was talking about at the start of this call. um, my capacity to get into a peaceful state allows me to not let my emotions overwhelm me. So then my words are clearer and I'm able to speak with more confidence. Because when
Mm.
you're able to slow down, that creates certainty and it creates a capacity to be able to communicate powerfully.
Yes.
That's probably what I'd have to say to that.
So for those who are not working with you yet, what would be the number one thing that you would encourage more people to do so they can have more of a peaceful state of mind?
Well, they need to come up with what are the things that puts them in a peaceful state, because it's different for everybody. Now, that starts with structure in your life. Because if you don't have boundaries for your life in every area of your life, you don't have effectively a container to contain yourself in so that you can flow. And so, an example of that would be in your daily work life, like what are your boundaries in the workplace that you set for yourself that are your yeses and your nos, and being clear on them, right? Because then what happens is if you're not clear on your boundaries and you're not able to communicate them powerfully, you end up doing things that you don't want to do, and then you end up losing your sense of self,
Yes.
and then you start feeling unsafe, and then you start underperforming. See how this is all interconnected.
I love
Yeah.
it. With the boundary part, I will also encourage people to set out boundaries with friends and family too. But you know what? I feel like sometimes people can blur the line between personal life and work life. Like I do encourage people to talk about emotions and at work and personally and work together. But some people, they might not be able to cut that line and they might not be able to focus at work and then accidentally bring work stress back home. So how can people balance that?
Yeah. And that's where boundaries is really important, because you got to know when you're okay. So I'll explain it from my example, right? Because I'm all about examples. So one thing that I've done is every time I do a task, I put a timer on for how long I want to do that task. And then when that timer goes off, I check in to see whether I want to continue it or whether there's something calling me that I want to do next. Now that's in one book that I have. In another book, I have my running list of tasks for the day that I could do, right? But I really focus on what I presently want to do moment to moment. It's about getting that level of presence into the way that you approach your work. Because what happens is, then when you put a boundary on your tasks as well and say, every day I aim to do this amount of tasks. And once I hit that amount, I stop, right? This does two things. It puts a boundary around your tasks and it forces you to be efficient with the things that you do. So you don't do like the noise work, but you do what's critical.
Yeah.
And then that allows you the freedom to then switch off from work, because you said, hey, now that I've done these tasks, work is finished.
Yeah.
Once I've done 10 tasks for the day or 3 critical tasks, however you want to frame it, my work is done.
Yes.
And then you create a transition. So my transition is I go and have a shower, like a cold shower, or I go and have a snack that I love, or I go and change my clothes. Like it's just creating a transition helps wire our mind to believe that we've gone from one thing to the next and one thing is finished and a new thing is starting. So when we talk about work and then life balance, like after work, you need that transition that actually cues in your mind, hey, I'm actually switching out of work mode and into relaxing mode. And then putting boundaries in place to make sure that you're not doing anything work related in that time. That's one way to approach it, but everyone's work and life balance is different. Everyone's work looks different. Some people have flexible work hours where they can work within 24 hours a day at any time, especially with COVID happening, right?
Yeah.
With so much more flexibility. So it becomes even harder to set boundaries, which means your boundaries have to be even more solid all around.
Yeah.
Because if they're not, you'll just free flow and you'll end up doing things just for the sake of where life is kind of leading you rather than life happening through you. Boundaries allows life to happen through you, not to you.
Love it. For those who are listening, can you please set out boundaries for yourself, personal life and work life? And I think, yeah, sure, now it's COVID. You can still change, into home clothes and work clothes. I think that would help. And I'm just so happy that you have found this purpose in helping people, which is beautiful. But I guess it's kind of hard, I don't know, for people to find their purpose. How would you encourage people to start? Where?
Now that opens up a few things, because it can be purpose in the workplace. It can be purpose that you actually feel like your purpose is outside of the workplace, and then you have to look at that differently too. Because I help men with that in that department. I help men align what they feel their purpose is with the purpose of the organization. And if that doesn't fit and they want to have purpose outside of the workplace, I help them develop purpose projects that gives them somewhere in their life where they're doing something that's completely on purpose, which then translates into their workplace to feel more fulfillment. Because unfortunately, the reality is sometimes we have to go and do jobs that aren't fulfilling, but they're there to hit a paycheck. And that naturally does occur in society. Now, I would love to see a society where everyone's working in a job that they love. But speaking to the people specifically who are working in a job that they feel like they're stuck in and that they're just doing because they're earning money, I help those people either develop an exit strategy to move towards a life where they're actually living on purpose. Or I help them discover what their purpose is within the organization and align it more congruently. Those are the two things that really need to be looked at if you're looking at purpose in your life.
Yes. I like the way that you said it, how there is different purpose, because you're right. Like, you need to find your purpose at work. And totally, not everyone really is doing what they love, but I just want to, I guess, help people to look at it in a different way. Think of it like it's part of your journey.
Yeah.
Because if you continue to work towards whatever your goal you might have, then that unfulfilling job right now is actually going towards your dream. So
Mm.
that's how I feel.
I love that.
um, Thank you. Thank you so much. So, you know how before you talked about forgiveness?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was your life like before you forgiven your dad?
My life before that was I was a very angry person because I was harboring a lot of bitterness and a lot of resentment, and it was just buried in my body, in my cells, and I was holding all of that. So my life reflected how I felt. I was an angry person on the inside. I would mask it by trying to be the funny person or like joke around with my mates. But you'll notice with people in life, if they're operating in an extreme and you see that, often they're hiding the other extreme buried within themselves. So if I'm trying to be overly happy and overly funny and there's not this medium of the way that I'm operating, it's probable that I'm actually trying to hide a lot of anger and a lot of hurt and a lot of sadness.
Unless that person has worked on themselves.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
But so you were an angry person.
What have you enjoyed so far? What notes have you taken down? How will you be there for your colleagues from now on? Will you be brave enough to have tough conversations with your parents? I know, so many questions. But I really, you have enjoyed the interview so far.
Heshan.
Has already shared a few tips on how you can be there for yourself and ultimately be there for others. We're all humans after all, so let's have more acceptance in expressing our emotions. Continue on to watch part 2. The link should pop up somewhere on the screen. But if you're like, no, I want to jump on it now and help myself, well, the Model Man's detail is all in the description. Again, we would really appreciate it if you can do a screenshot however you're watching this and tag us on social. Spread the love. Now don't forget to subscribe, click the thumbs up button if you have loved it, and share it with someone because you never know what they're going through or what they might need. And remember, you're amazing and you are not alone. And I will see you next time!